Howdy, Stanford. Salutations. I wanted to just take a couple minutes as we dive into our first week and welcoming you to the proceedings. This is my lovely apartment. We are in the Mission District of San Francisco, and I am absolutely thrilled to be spending, 10 weeks talking narrative with you. It's super, super fun for me to get a chance to not only talk with you in the static environment of the chat room, but also have a time to film these videos. So I get a little bit of a chance to feel as though I'm getting maybe some sort of a facsimile of the classroom. So you can get a sense of what my style would be like if we were actually in an MFA environment together. The thesis of this first chat that we're going to have is basically just to introduce the concept of the compelling story, which will be a notion that we revisit, time and again throughout the duration of the quarter. And what I mean when I say the compelling story is I want you thinking about not only your novel from the standpoint of what's my plot going to be, what are the characters going to be, so on and so forth. Obviously, we'll talk about those things ad nauseum as well. But I would also like us to be thinking about your particular storytelling style. What's the aesthetic that you're trying to hone? What's the style? What's the personality that you're trying to capture on the page? If you think about the great constellation of not only the canon writers, but the fringe writers and the people who are working today, kind of your peers, I guess the question would be, how would you personally define compelling story? What's the word compelling mean to you? And what does the word story mean to you? That constellation of writers from the past and writers from present time, they would all define the word compelling differently, and they would all define the word story differently from you and from one another. So if here's our universe over here, right? Here we have Virginia Woolf. Here we have Amy Hempel. There's Garcia Marquez. There's Hemingway and Faulkner having a fist fight down here. Here's E.L. Doctorow. Who's another person that I could think about? Grace Paley. All of these people would define the word compelling story in vastly different ways. And that's one of the really cool things about being an artist, is that we are all going to define compelling in various ways. And we're all going to define story in different ways. There's no template. There's no schematic. Over this 10 weeks that we are studying together, I'm not going to give you, the golden ticket to get into Willy Wonka's factory. And by the end of this 10 weeks, you say to yourself, wow, I can knock out a novel in no time flat. I think it's cool that there's no template or there's no grid, but I think others can see a little bit of frustration in that as well, that there's no kind of there's no antidote. There's no kind of like way to cut corners. The only way to write your version of a compelling story is to first identify what you're trying to do on the page. What's the style? What's the aesthetic? What's the personality? So on and so forth. And then start to funnel those kind of abstract goals into something a little bit more specific. These will be the protagonists. This is going to be the sequence of events that I launch these protagonists into as the book gets underway. We'll slowly make the roller coaster lurch. That first really scary drop on a roller coaster. Well, kind of the first half of a novel works that way too. We're slowly ratcheting up the hill. Each new plot point, each new chapter is going to raise the stakes for your audience. And finally, when we get to the climactic action, is when we get to kind of have that lovely and kind of frenetic gust down to see the resolution of the story that you've taken us on. So that's kind of be the way that we launch this first week. Certainly we're talking about narrative conflict and narrative tension, but I also want you thinking about your own work, your own aesthetic, your own style. And in fact, we can use this thread as a way to maybe unearth. Maybe we can excavate some of these answers. You might know these things on a subconscious level, but have never really consciously pondered them before. So if you feel like it, respond to this forum threads just by saying compelling is X, story is Y. And write 3 or 4 sentences so we, as your audience and your colleagues for the next quarter, get a sense of what you're trying to accomplish on the page. Dennis Johnson is a great writer. E.L. Doctorow is a great writer. Susan Steinberg is a great writer. And they're all trying to accomplish the same goal of telling a compelling story, yet they're going to go about accomplishing that goal in wildly, wildly different ways. So hopefully during the form and theory portion of the OWC, we're able to start examining, we're able to start zeroing in on how you want to interact with your audience, how you want to seduce a total stranger into giving you 5 hours of her life, 8 hours of her life, 10 hours of her life to finish your book. Like, that's the reader side of the transaction. They are very generously going to give us some of their time. Now, our part of the transaction is that we promise to take them on the most compelling journey that we can possibly muster. And that is going to be what we're starting to examine during this quarter together. I'm absolutely thrilled to be studying with all of you. We're going to work hard, but I think the way that the curriculum is laid out, there's a lot of opportunities for us to have a lot of fun along the way. Fun is a really important word for me, not only as a professor, but a writer and also as a human being. I feel like if we follow the fun rarely leads us in the wrong direction. We're going to emphasize trial and error in this class, and I'll post one of these at the beginning of next week too, that will deal more explicitly with our class mantra, which is liberate yourself from quality. And just, very quickly, the idea being that it's too soon for you to be mean to the words you've just created. They have to have a chance to steep, they have to have a chance to rest, and maybe they'll earn their space down the road. In a sense, it doesn't really matter yet. What you're trying to do is get that beginning and a middle and an ending down on the page, because so much of what we do as artists and as writers is reverse engineering. We have to have the entire beginning and a middle and an ending, and then we can kind of look back and say, oh, of course, I thought chapter 2 was going to be this way, but I didn't really know what was going to happen toward the end. And now that I have an idea where my character is going to end up, I need to tune backward. I need to either reimagine how chapter 2 is being told, or I just need to completely tear it down and build it up to start. I think a lot of apprentice writers tend to really just work on chapter 1 and work on chapter 1 and work on chapter 1, get it very, very polished. But the problem with that is you don't have any proof that that's actually going to make the final cut. So hopefully with these excerpts that you're sending me every week, it's going to force you to continue to write ahead in your book, to accrue more data about your characters, about this world. And the farther you get into their psychologies, the deeper you push into their sequence of events, that's when you'll really start forming that necessary intimacy between main character and author. And that will directly translate to the intimacy necessary between main character and reader. That's enough blathering for the first week. Like I said, I'll post one of these next week as well that will deal primarily with our class mantra, liberate yourself from quality. But for tonight, or for later this week, try to kick around this idea of what is going to be your definition of the compelling story, and feel free to share that with us in this thread. Have a good week, Stanford.